Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Romeo and Juliet, and today we get to hear from Juliet's nurse in Act 1, Scene 3, as it's known in most versions because the folio doesn't have act and scene delineations. So the things that are going on, the Montagues and the Capulets hate each other, but we don't know exactly why, and they've been brawling in the streets, and if that happens one more time, somebody's gonna die. And I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but that's okay. Romeo is depressed because he's in love with a woman named Rosalind who has decided that she's going to be chaste, and Romeo thinks it's a waste of her beauty that she won't sleep with him. Benvolio is trying to cheer him up, and they manage to find out that there's a party happening at the Capulet's house, because in part to celebrate spring, but also Lord Capulet wants Paris to come to this party because this guy Paris wants to marry Juliet, who's only 13 years old, and Lord Capulet's like, give her another couple years before she gets married, but Paris is a little bit antsy, but he's like, come to this party tonight and you can see that my daughter's the best and she's worth waiting for and all that sort of thing. So that's happening at the party. But then Benvolio and Romeo also find out about the party because of a serving person who doesn't know how to read. They find out that Rosalind's going to be there. So Romeo's like, oh, I want to be there because Rosalind's going to be there. And Benvolio's like, we should totally go because then you can see that there's other women in the world and you can get out of this funk. Maybe you'll find somebody who's even more beautiful than Rosalind. So Act 1, Scene 3, we get to check in with the ladies. And we start out with Lady Capulet and Juliet's nurse. And Juliet's nurse is, of course, the one who actually raised Juliet because, women of a certain station didn't breastfeed their own kids, that sort of thing. And Lady Capulet's like, go get my daughter. And the nurse gets her and brings her in. And she's like, okay, nurse, you can go now. Wait a second, nurse, come back. Because Lady Capulet doesn't actually know how to talk to her own kid. And she starts out with look at, you're turning into this lovely young woman. And you're 13 and some odd years old now? That kind of thing. And the nurse says, even a rod of all the days of the year, come Lammas Eve at night, shall she be 14. Susan and she, God rest all Christian souls, were of an age. Well, Susan is with God. She was too good for me. But as I said, on Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. That shall she marry. I remember it well. 'Tis since the earthquake now, 11 years. And she was weaned, I'll never forget it, of all the days of the year upon that day. For I had then laid wormwood to my dug, sitting in the sun under the dove-house wall. My lord and you were then at Mantua. Nay, I do bear a brain. But as I said, when it did taste the wormwood on the nipple of my dug and felt it bitter, pretty fool, see it tetchy and fall out with the dug. Shake, quoth the dove-house, 'twas no need, I trow, to bid me trudge. And since that time it is 11 years, for then she could stand alone. Nay, by the rood, she could have run and waddled all about, for even the day before she broke her brow, and then my husband, God be with his soul, he was a merry man, took up the child. Yea, quoth he, dost thou fall upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou hast more wit, wilt thou not, Jewel? And by my holiday, the pretty wretch left crying, and said, I, to see now how a jest shall come about. I warrant, and I shall live 1,000 years, I never should forget it. Wilt thou not, Juliet? Quoth he, and pretty fool, it stinted and said, I. So this is the nurse recounting how much she knows about Juliet. Basically, she's like, yes, I know when Juliet's birthday is. It's on Lammas Eve, and she's going to turn 14 years old, and she was the same age as my daughter, who is now dead. And I remember that she's 14 years old because it's been 11 years since this earthquake happened, and it just so happened that I was weaning Juliet on the day that the earthquake happened, which means she was breastfeeding Juliet for 3 years. But anyway, put that aside. But then she also remembers that Juliet was 3 years old because she was able to walk at this time, but she was running around and she fell forward, and the nurse's husband, who was also now dead, picked Juliet up and is like, oh, before you know it, you're going to be falling on your back, which is an an overt sexual reference to be making to a 3-year-old, but of course the 3-year-old didn't get that, so she just said yes when he was like, "You're gonna fall on your back, aren't you?" And she was like, "Yes." And the nurse thinks that this is the funniest thing in the world, because I guess it is funny when somebody makes a weird sexual joke in the direction of a 3-year-old and the 3-year-old agrees with it. So yeah, she laughs about that for a little while, and finally Juliet and Lady Capulet are able to get the nurse to, calm down a little bit long enough. They bring up marriage, and Lady Capulet is like, "Yeah, Juliet, what do you think about marriage?" And Juliet's like, I don't imagine that I would ever be so honored as to get married." And Lady Capulet is like, "Well, I know someone who wants to marry you." And we'll hear more about that tomorrow. Even though we, the audience, already know who it is that wants to marry her. It's Paris. So we'll get to hear Lady Capulet talking about Paris tomorrow. Sounds like fun, right? Cool. I'll see you then. Mwah.